It's funny the kind of things people remember. Little things that at the time don't seem important, yet somehow seem to stay with you for the rest of your life. For me, that summer's day in 1918 is one of them. It seems as though it were only yesterday. Heaven knows the number of times we've made that journey together, me and old Arthur Sutton. We never used to talk much at the best of times, but I suppose he was the governor, and I must have been, well, all of 14. Still, for some reason, I remember feeling then that something was funny. The old chap never said a word, just sat there. All I could do was mind my own business and enjoy the trip. We got to the station about the same time as every afternoon, just before the London train was ready to leave. Everybody knew him. Usually he'd march straight through and onto the train, but for some reason that day he stopped and chatted with a ticket collector, solemnly shaking hands when they'd finished. I just didn't know what to make of it. And another thing, he didn't hurry as usual. He just seemed to be content to take his time, looking from side to side, almost as though he'd never been there before. It was all very strange. When he got to his carriage, he took the bag I'd been carrying and swung it up onto the seat. Then suddenly, to my surprise, he turned and began to speak quietly. "Well, my boy," he said, "I'm going to retire, so I probably won't be seeing you again. But you mark my words, stay where you are and work hard. Gardening's a grand life, and who knows, if you stick at it, one day you may even end up a director like me." And before I knew it, he was gone. I never did see him again, but I've always remembered what he said. He said I'd enjoy it, and I have. He said I could become a director, and I did. Well, a lot's happened since I stood and watched old Arthur's train disappear that day. A whole lifetime, in fact. The funny thing is that, although I spent 50-odd years with one firm, the time's whistled by. Still, I suppose the seed business is like that. Once you've got the bug, you can't think about much else. It sometimes puzzles me, though, just how little other people know about what's involved. Most of them simply haven't got a clue. I think the reason is that, even these days, the bulk of our customers do business by post. And of course that makes it a bit difficult to meet them. Every autumn we send out something like, well, must be close on 1 million catalogues to customers all over the country. Envelopes crammed full of names and photographs to tickle the fancy of every gardener with a bit of ground to stick a fork into. But what they don't realize, and I suppose there's no reason why they should, is that behind every single flower and vegetable listed in that book lies a fascinating story. Seed may come in fancy packets, but you can take it from me, it doesn't grow on trees. Seed. Tiny bits of life that look like bits of nothing. Each one a link in a chain that stretches back 1 million years or more. And locked away inside, the hidden secrets of generations to come. It all sounds very grand, but the truth is, most wild seed have got a big enough job on to survive at all. The weak and infertile just die where they fall, and the rest take their chances against disease, wildlife, poor soil, and the weather. By some miracle, when spring comes round, the survivors are popping up again. It's a bit of a marvel, really. But it's always struck me as being a bit of a waste as well, and I suppose old John Sutton must have thought the same. He and his son were seedsmen at a time when the performance of horticultural seed was almost as unpredictable as the natural kind. The two of them set out to improve the quality of their stocks by selecting and testing the very best seed they could find, and in the 1830s that was a real revolution. Bit by bit they managed to build up a range of homegrown flower and vegetable seed that nobody else in the trade could match. And to keep it out of the hands of the opposition, they sold direct to their customers. Thanks to their printed catalogues and the new penny post, they became probably the first mail-order company in the world, and business really boomed. In those days, gardening was a favorite pastime of the rich and the well-to-do, and the Sutton family thrived on the whims of people with big estates and a bevy of gardeners to keep them up to scratch. Before long, Reading had become the center of all that was new in gardening seed, just as Paris had become the center of fashion. Today, the difference between natural seed and the stuff in these sacks is 150 years of picking and choosing. It may look the same, but it's not. Anything that ends up on one of these racks has probably got a pedigree as long as your arm. Years of patient work by a lot of people, concentrated into tiny specks of fiber that are quietly bursting with unseen life and vitality. I often reckon if you really want to see what good seed can do, the best place is your local market. Tons of fresh vegetables and masses of flowers rolling in by the truckload from growers who can hardly harvest the stuff quick enough to meet the demand. The sheer quantity is staggering, and where they'd be without reliable seed to start with, heaven only knows. We'd probably still be using ration books. And then there's the variety of stuff to choose from. It wasn't so long ago that out of season meant exactly that. These days, with early varieties and late varieties, the season for most things stretches the best part of the year. I suppose we tend to take it all for granted now. But new varieties don't happen by chance. On top of that, the quality has improved out of this world since I was a boy. Bigger, firmer, more tasty vegetables, and as for flowers, well, I don't know where to start. New shapes and bigger blooms in colors that'll take your breath away. No matter what you say, the stuff around today is a real credit to top-class seed, because let's face it, the growing conditions are just as tough as they've always been. Even after all these years, I still get a thrill when I see a field of prime veg ripe for harvest. At one time, you'd be pushing your luck if you reckon more than half the crop would be worth selling, even if it came up. You might think that now, with modern fertilizers and all the rest of it, commercial growing is a piece of cake. But it's nothing of the kind. The weather's just as bad. In fact, I sometimes think it's worse. And there's plenty of other things to go wrong if a chap hasn't got his wits about him. Good, strong, healthy plants only come from good, strong, healthy seed. And there's no shortcuts if a grower's going to reap the benefits of months of hard graft. Still, although the commercial grower is important, he's just one side of the coin. For every chap that thinks of good seed as a sound business investment, there's 10,000 others who think of it as an investment in future pleasure and satisfaction. The amateur gardener may not grow as much, but what he does grow is a labor of love. And to me, that's just as important. If you ask me, a bit of back garden and green fingers are a pretty powerful combination. It's a funny kind of pastime. You either love it or you hate it. But for a couple of hours work a week and the cost of a few packets of seed, the rewards in pure enjoyment can be almost limitless. And these days, it doesn't matter who you are or where you live either. Oh, it's nice if you've got half an acre in the country to mess around with, but even so, there's a lot you can do if you're stuck in the middle of town, if you've a mind to. But the thing that fascinates me is that each one is somebody's idea of what their own little patch should look like. As individual as the palm of your hand. It may sound dark, but I often think our job is to provide gardeners with opportunity. Opportunity in a packet. It's a bit like giving an artist a box of paints. It's what he does afterwards that really counts. But unlike paint, you can't manufacture seed. It has to be raised and cared for like a baby. And that's what being a seedsman is all about. If you've ever been down to the West Country by train, then more than likely you pass the Suutons place. Apart from a few weeks in summer, I imagine it must look pretty ordinary to most people. A few chaps pottering about, but nothing you call spectacular. Yet that bit of land probably affects thousands, maybe even millions of acres all over the world. Sometimes even I forget just how many popular varieties of flowers and veg first struggle to see the light of day on those grounds. But in spite of the fact that it seems so quiet, there's always a lot going on. Right the way round the year, in the greenhouses and out in the grounds, people are busy putting together the bits of hundreds of different jigsaws. Each separate job is a small step in a complicated search that may have started 5, 10, even 20 years ago. If things work out, the final result in each case could be a new plant with new characteristics. A variety that, had it been left to nature alone, would have taken another few thousand years to perfect, if ever. One way and another, we get up to all kinds of things. We may be trying to isolate a new type of bean plant that'll produce twice as many pods as something twice its size. Or perhaps working on a new kind of pea that'll not only look a nicer green than other types, but taste sweeter as well. Whatever it is, we're always trying to find a way to make it just that little bit better. But although a good veg will satisfy the appetite, there's no doubt in my mind it's flowers that please the eye. You can argue about what makes a flower beautiful for ours. Everyone seems to have their own idea. I just happen to think our ideas are better than most. I don't mind telling anybody, when it comes to flowers, we like to please ourselves a bit. Year after year, for as long as I can remember, we've slowly been improving existing types and creating new ones, getting more flowers in more colors that bloom earlier and last longer, changing the shape and size of the heads and trying to develop the form and texture of the leaves. But no matter what we're trying to do aesthetically, we're always trying to build in other things like resistance to disease and making plants strong enough to grow where maybe they never stood a chance before. The secret is plant breeding. It sounds simple enough, but it's not. It takes flair, it takes patience, and above all, it takes time.
Dave, when you have time, I think you should show this cabbage again. It's showing signs of dormancy. The rest of the tests are perfectly satisfactory.
Modern plant breeding's part science, part intuition. The favourite idea of an eccentric old man pottering around in a greenhouse certainly isn't true today. And to be honest, I doubt whether it ever was. It's a long process because the patterns are set by the seasons and the way things grow, and there's not much anyone can do to speed it up. If I was asked what was the most important asset in plant breeding, I think I'd say patience. Apart from the time, there's more than one thing that can go wrong.
Oh, I don't like this yellow one. That's a rogue.
It's far too tall as well, isn't it?
Yeah, discard it. Discard it. This plant, now, that's a beautiful plant. It's a lovely top, but it hasn't got the conical shape I like.
Breeding on a large scale is obviously a team effort. There may be scores of different projects going on at the same time, but everything comes under the watchful eye of one man.
Jenny, I think this is the one we want. Silver-leaved, and I think you smell it. You'll find it's got plenty of perfume, which the silver-leaved one should have.
That's very nice. Very nice.
Now that's 72189. We've got 10-2 here. If you can just count the number of mottled seedlings in there, I'll count the number of silvers. We can see if the ratios correspond.
Okay.
These days, plant breeders have got one big advantage we never had in my day. A knowledge of genetics.
That's all
With a bit of paper and a slide rule, they can sit down and predict the likely outcome of a complicated breeding program. They can work out the right numbers and ratios of the plants they need to cross. It may be only 2, it could be 1,000. It just depends how difficult the objective you've chosen is to isolate. That's one reason why I've always found the job so fascinating. There's no hard and fast rules. A project will get off the ground in a number of ways. It may even be by accident. One of our chaps could be out checking a crop somewhere and suddenly spot a plant that sticks out like a sore thumb. Just 1 in a million. For some reason or another, nature's missed a beat and thrown up something completely different. Once we get it back to Reading, it'll be grown in isolation and then cuttings taken to provide enough plants for a breeding program. Of course, it might all come to nothing, but there again, it could be a new breakthrough in that particular species. Most of the time, though, we've got a pretty good idea of what we're after before we start. To begin with, we'll get together a suitable selection of seed, different varieties of one type of plant, and grow them out on the grounds. They'll all have one or more of the characteristics that we're hoping to bring together in one specimen. Once they're big enough to tell, the promising ones are marked and the rest thrown away. The ones we keep all get a number and are logged in the firm's trial books to provide a record of the project from beginning to end. And as soon as they begin to get near the flowering stage, they're taken inside one of the houses under more controlled conditions. If there's one thing that so far no one's been able to get round, it's that even with the marvels of modern science, the only way to breed plants is by pollination. In the wild, most plants fertilize themselves with the help of bees and things, but in breeding, it's got to be done by hand to a carefully prepared plan. Having washed away the pollen in one flower to make sure it can't fertilize itself, the pollen from its chosen partner is rubbed onto the remaining stigma. The days pass and the first fruits of a distant objective begin to appear. A few precious seeds with hidden characteristics passed on by its parents. As far as I can see, the real skill lies in a deep knowledge of the various types of plants and knowing where to find the most likely parents to start with. If we're lucky, we might find all we want from the firm's own stocks, but sometimes we may have to call in breeding material from all over the world. The rest depends on the care and patience of the greenhouse staff, because it's a pretty finicky and repetitive job. Once in a while, though, we get a chance to call in the real experts. Although techniques differ depending on the species of plant, the basic idea remains the same. The results of one season's work will be resown the next, the most promising parent selected and crossed again. Slowly, year by year, the various projects close in on their objective, and all the time and trouble begin to pay off. All that's left at the end of a successful breeding program is a few handfuls of seed. Not much to show for a minimum of 4 years' careful work, even though it's worth far more than its weight in gold. The next problem is to build up enough stock, and because of the huge amounts needed, almost all our bulk seed requirements have to be grown under contract by chaps who specialize in this important branch of horticulture. That's not to say we forget all about it. Our own lads are always popping in to keep an eye on things right the way through the season. Sometimes these trips are fairly local, but a lot of their time is spent even further afield. When it comes to growing the best possible seed, we reckon the world's our garden. After all, if you've spent years trying to breed an outstanding plant, it stands to reason you want to give it the best possible start in life. And where better than a place with a climate that'll suit it down to the ground? Italy's just one of a score of faraway places where, under warm sunshine and lots of attention, the company's bulk seed is grown to perfection. It's funny when you think about it. All over Europe, in India and California, even way down in Australia and New Zealand, there are fields and fields that, to all intents and purposes, are almost bits of England. I suppose some people must be a bit surprised that a flower that may end up in a window box in Putney, like as not, started its life a few kilometres from Naples. Growing seed abroad's nothing new to us, though. We've been doing it for donkey's years. In fact, I've known most of the growers down there since they were lads, and their fathers before that. You can take it from me, what they don't know about the job isn't worth much. They'll take the tiny amounts of precious stock seed from Reading and year by year gradually build up the necessary quantities. Even now, to guard against accidents, every variety has to be carefully isolated from other plants, which could possibly fertilize that particular crop. If you don't watch it, a long-distance bee or wind-blown pollen from wild or local plants can really put the cat amongst the pigeons and ruin a whole year's work. But by midsummer, the results begin to show. Plants that are tended and cared for, watched over and looked after until they finally bloom and go to seed. The knack about harvesting is knowing exactly when to start. Even after all this time, good seed can be ruined if it's taken in a moment too soon or left standing a moment too long. The right time must be those couple of days when the seed is at the peak of perfection. And once the decision's taken, it's a bit of a race in case the weather changes and messes everything up. Nowadays, most of the crops can be collected by combine, but with some varieties, seed on the same plant ripens at different times, and that means picking by hand. To be honest, it's not a job I particularly fancy, but I'm afraid there's no other way. The biggest problem now is to keep the seed at the peak of harvest freshness, because the moment it leaves the plant, all seed begins to deteriorate. Slowly, all the natural strength and vitality just begin to drain away. At one time, there was nothing anybody could do about it. It was a fact of life. But recently, our chaps have come up with the answer. The secret is to put the seed to sleep. As soon as the seed starts rolling into Reading, a typical sample from every batch goes straight to the laboratory for testing. It's examined for purity to make sure it's not been accidentally mixed with other types of seed, and then we check it to see it germinates as vigorously as it should. Once we're satisfied, the rest of the batch is cleaned and taken to special stores, where under controlled conditions the moisture content of the seed is carefully reduced until its strong life beat is lowered to a gentle tick over. The difference between seeds left to fend for themselves and ours of the same age but treated by this simple process is staggering. The moment they're sown again, they burst back to life, as fresh as the day they were picked. The final step is to lock it away in our specially sealed foil packets, and the full vigor of harvest fresh seed lies dozing until it's released again in someone else's garden. Like I said, there's more to a packet of seed than meets the eye. A lot of time and trouble that people don't realize. A whole business based on the nice idea of giving nature a gentle nudge in the right direction. If you're good at it, the result's dependable seed that's easy to grow into plants to be proud of. From time to time, I've often wondered whether or not there's another job that could have offered an ordinary chap like me so much pleasure and satisfaction. I must admit I've never been able to think of one, so old Arthur Sutton was right from that point of view. If I had my time all over again, I'd probably do exactly the same. In a few months, though, I shall be retiring myself, and I dare say I shall feel just as bad about it as he did. Still, you can't go on forever. At least I shall be able to spend more time in my own garden. Anyway, it's not a bad prospect. A bit of garden and old friends. I don't think anyone could wish for much more than that.